Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are in North America. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Today is Wednesday, the 20th of July. My goodness, that was hard to roll out. Almost as hard to say as it is to believe how fast the summer's flying by, eh?
Agreed.
So yeah, so my name is Katie Griffin. If you've never seen me or met me before, I am the Director of Business Development here at Spire. And we are in our 7th episode of our knowledge-based webinar series. Thank you all so much for joining us. If this is the first webinar series that you've attended, welcome. And if it's the 7th or less, welcome back. I'm definitely going to get the show on the road and start making some introductions here. As I said, I'm Katie Griffin, Director of Business Development at Spire, and I am joined by my friend Russ Graff at Netstock, VP of Channel Management. All these titles floating around, but basically, Russ, that means that you've done a whole lot of this before, and I'm so glad to have you here today. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Yeah, my pleasure to be here. Happy to be part of this. And I think if anybody is 7 for 7 in your attendance, ought to be able to get some sort of a prize, don't you think?
I think so. That's a good suggestion that our we'll consider in the marketing department. I'll have someone actually do a bit of a search and see.
Now you'll ask me to chip in. I can tell.
7. Yeah. Where's your Amazon gift card, Russ?
Right,
Yeah,
right,
absolutely. Right. Well, thank you again so much for being with me here today. And ladies and gentlemen, if you have done this before, then you know I'm about to run through a little bit of housekeeping for us. So what I would like to ask everyone first and foremost is if you can hear us and you can see us, to go ahead and raise your hand. You have the option to raise your hand there and you'll be able to. Thank you, Spencer. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Sally. Okay, so everyone can see and hear us. I'm going to go ahead and lower everyone's hand. This is a go-to webinar, a little bit different than a Zoom. It basically means that you can see us, but we can't see you. That's okay. There will come a time where we will all see each other again. But for now, this is where we're at. You can find any more information on Spire events on our Spire events web page. These monthly knowledge-based webinars are listed there. We try to get the next one out in time for the one we're showing you today. And then, of course, any other Spire events that are taking place. We've got some stuff coming up this fall, so make sure you check that out. You will get a certificate of attendance for joining us here after the webinar. Usually comes out a day after the webinar. And this really is a conversation. It's not a training session, so we're not going to be training you on Spire in any way. We don't have a Q&A portion. Again, it's really just a discussion. But if you do have any questions, I strongly encourage you to contact your Spire partner. Most of them are in the audience here today and will be able to answer any questions that you have regarding the topic at hand, or also connect you with my friend Russ. So with all of that being said, let's get the show on the road. Russ, I'm just going to kind of go through the agenda a little bit here. We're going to be talking about the challenges that are faced in the supply chain today and historically, what kind of issues are most common and what people are dealing with. Russ, you're going to share with me some of your experience. You've been at this for a few years, I think. Right. And so you're going to share with our guests today what it is that you've seen, good consequences, bad consequences of proper planning and forecasting. We're going to talk about tips that Russ has to help our audience put things into place, different practices into place to ensure that your current situation is as ideal as possible when dealing with these supply chain issues, because we really don't have control over what happens in the supply chain, but how we deal with it, right? Right. And then Russ, we're going to spend some time on really discussing forecast and demand. You know, what are the tools that are necessary to be able to do that? What kind of processes in place? What kind of evaluation and reevaluation should our friends in the audience be doing? So without further delay, let's go ahead and talk about this. So Russ, supply chain challenges, right? You know, the challenges today, and Russ, you're in the United States, you're in Wisconsin, okay? Right. I happen to be in Montreal today, but I think whether you're Canadian or American, that labor shortages are definitely something on the map, Russ.
Yeah, it's a huge issue, and there's a couple of ways that it impacts us in the supply chain side. Obviously, we're going through what's being called the Great Resignation. I've heard it termed the Great Reshuffle, and I think what it really amounts to is that because of the demand for labor, existing positions are at risk, right? Employees are willing to take a look and make a move because it's easy to find the next position, right? So they're challenging their existing employment situation to say, is this where I want to be? Is this where I can excel my career, right? Am I happy where I'm at? Those kinds of things. So there are serious labor challenges. And then the other aspect of it is because of the stress in the supply chain environment in particular, which we'll talk about as we go here, there's a fair amount of burnout that's being reported amongst supply chain specific employees within our organizations. They've been very stressed and dealing with all the challenges, working overtime, working hard, dealing with situations that they've never had to deal with before over the last couple of years. And you can do it for a while, but at some point you reach a burnout level. So we're getting that feedback as well. But yeah, if I've got a factory and I can't run all 3 shifts or 2 shifts that I want to because of lack of employees, that just exacerbates the supply issue. Right now, I can't deliver my product and supply my customers. So it becomes a self-feeding circular environment that's very challenging right now.
And I mean, it filters into the transportation issue as well. I mean, so, employee motivation, driver shortages, right? I mean, these materials and these products that are being manufactured and distributed need someone to take them. Aside from the fact that there's labor shortages in making them, what happens when they now need to go somewhere? And I think that aside from the labor issue, when it comes to transportation, Russ, you've probably heard a lot about cyber attacks and deteriorating infrastructure that contributes to the transportation challenge as well.
Yeah, there's all kinds of things related to this, right? In fact, I was a guest on a podcast not too long ago, and I think I told you this the other day, that was actually driven by a couple of guys out of Texas that address the trucker market. And a lot of their topics is about trucker safety and rules and documentation and how to be safe on the road and so forth. But they had me on to talk about some supply chain stuff related to that. But yeah, I mean, trucking has historically been a challenging environment for labor issues. It's worse now than ever. And costs have gotten out of hand in some areas. Of course, with fuel prices the way they have been, especially recently, that's another level of pressure on the transportation business. So, but you're right. I mean, the rule of thumb in the United States, and I assume it's similar in Canada, is that if you've got something on your desk that you're working with or you've eaten or somehow consuming in your home, furniture, whatever, it probably got there, at least at one segment of that transportation was via truck. So that's a real challenge, no question about it.
Yeah, for sure. And it filters into the ships as well, and air transport as well. And speaking of ships and ports and whatnot, I was doing a bit of research in preparation for our chat today, Russ. And I'm from Montreal, born and raised in Montreal, and people are fairly familiar that we have a nice sized port in Montreal. And in an article by Bloomberg in April, the CEO of the Montreal Port Authority, Martin Emblot, I don't know him personally, but had been talking about shipments being redirected through the Port of Montreal. And the Port of Montreal sits at the base of the St. Lawrence River, which is about 620 miles off of the Atlantic Ocean, right? And whereas the Port of Vancouver doesn't have that long river that it needs to go into, but businesses now are willing to redirect shipments, even if it takes a little bit longer to get there, because there's less bottlenecks at
they
one
can actually
port.
Get unloaded when they get there. Yeah, that's right. We've the same experience in the west coast of the U.S. The Long Beach, Los Angeles harbor has you've probably seen stories about that, somewhere 70, 80 ships at a time sitting offshore waiting to get into the dock to get unloaded, and in some cases waiting for months. It has gotten better more recently, but it's still a challenge. But yeah, I've got a colleague of mine at Netstock that's in Vancouver at the moment. He actually sent me a picture the other day of the port in Vancouver with multiple
Mhm.
ships lined up just waiting to get in. So yeah, you've seen some of that in the west coast of the U.S. where they've gone through the Panama Canal and gone into the Gulf to Houston and New Orleans and areas like that to get unloaded more efficiently than sitting in the water waiting off Long Beach. So yeah, it's crazy. I mean, that's unprecedented.
It is. And with that, comes increased costs. Never mind
Absolutely.
inflation. That's a whole other topic that we're going to talk about in a second. But the financing for housing inventory for an extra period of time than what was anticipated, or
Yep.
even just the money that's being lost in a shipment sitting at the dock waiting to be unloaded, right? And these
Yep.
things all come into consideration. It's not every company that can necessarily go to financial investors who are interested in investing in inventory. It's very hard to get financing for inventory, from what I understand. So all of this stuff contributes to a lot of different challenges. And then again, the cost of inflation, like we're talking about, and I don't want to spend too much time on that because
Yeah.
it's not a fun topic. But these are the challenges that people are facing nowadays.
Yeah.
You've
And
been
I think,
doing,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, go
I
ahead.
think the other aspect of this is that, what Spire addresses and what Netstock addresses are really middle market companies, right? Small, medium-sized
Yeah,
firms that are most impacted by this stuff, right? I mean, you've probably seen stories of Walmart and Home Depot and companies, Amazon, where they couldn't get freighter availability, so they bought their own freighter, right? Well,
yeah.
great, good for you guys, right?
We don't
Uh,
have that option,
don't
most of
have
us.
that option, right?
Yeah,
So the
yeah,
middle market in particular company is really squeezed by all these different competing factors, and that's what we try to. That's our market. Those are the folks we're trying to help.
yeah, absolutely. And you're right. Spire and Netstock have the same client
Mhm.
profile, if you will, of who the businesses are that need our help the most.
Yep.
Russ, you've been doing this for, if I look on your LinkedIn, you've been in this
Mhm.
business for 30 plus years almost, right?
Yes, I know I don't look that old, but yeah, almost 40 years. Yeah,
Oil,
yeah.
oil
All
will
my
lay
career.
twice a day.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right out of university, I got into systems consulting with accounting and ERP applications. So
right.
25 years as an actual partner. So there's
Yeah,
probably some Spire partners on this call or listening to the recording later. And I've been one of them, right? I did for a long time.
yeah.
And then now for the last dozen years or so, kind of on the other side of the fence, selling add-on products to those ERPs. But yeah, I've been in the space a long time.
So throughout your 30-year plus career,
Mhm.
you've seen different disruptions in the supply chain
Sure.
over the years, right? And I thought it'd be fun to kind of look at some of the historical supply chain issues that have happened, and we have to understand that it's not just because of COVID, right? Supply chain has always had some issues. Sure,
Yeah.
COVID amplified that, but for example, weather can be a
Yep.
huge impact, right? We think about Hurricane Katrina all those years ago, right, in 2005, and it knocked out all kinds of infrastructure, which made it horribly difficult for the supply chain to keep moving in a healthy way, right?
Sure. Well,
Um,
and the global nature of it means that those weather instances could occur anywhere, right? A typhoon in Asia, an earthquake, any of those kinds of things. So yeah, supply chain by its nature has always had to deal with disruptions. That's a big part of what supply chain managers deal with, is trying to mitigate or minimize risk,
right.
right? So yeah, there's always been that challenge.
And even, we talked a little bit earlier about those big businesses like Walmart who can just go out and throw money at a situation and it gets fixed, right?
Yep.
But, influence is also a factor in terms of disruption to the supply chain. Nike years ago had gotten a really bad rap for poor working conditions in certain countries. That affected the business.
That,
Now, our audience members are not Nike, but maybe some of them distribute some of these products, right? Um, Frozen, the movie Frozen, right? Disney, I think, totally underestimated how many Elsa dolls were going to be sold, right? And
right.
so,
Right.
and then global crisis, right? So the obvious one, the pandemic and the toilet paper shortage and all of that good stuff, right? So all these different things. I have a question for our audience, Russ.
Okay.
everyone in the audience here today signed up because hopefully they are working in the supply chain in some way, shape, or form. But I want to know, what is the biggest supply chain issue for your business, to our friends in the audience? If you can share that, you should be able to see a few options here. So is it production delays that really are affecting your business? Is it shipping, like we talked about? Acts of God, like the weather and the hurricanes and pandemic kind of things? Economic restraints, inflation, the cost of things? Or is it everything? Like, is it just the perfect storm kind of recipe that you all have been challenged by? And I see some good answers coming in here, Russ, and about 39% of our audience has voted so far. So Russ, in your opinion, before I share the answers from our friends here, what has been the biggest influence in damaging the supply chain?
Well, and I'm going to guess that all the above is going to win the poll, but because customers really do experience all these different things, maybe not all at the same time, but over the course of the last year or two, all those things have certainly had an impact. But yeah, and before, again, pre-COVID, right, we were also dealing with tariffs that were impacting. So there's all kinds of external influences, as you mentioned, or impacts that drive challenges in the supply chain. I think today it's primarily shipping issues has really become the biggest challenge for most of our customers. Just the lead times have stretched out so far. I think that's really been the predominant challenge for the last several months.
I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the answers, so you can see you were right. You were right. All of the above is the winner. In second place, production delays, so at the manufacturing level, and then neck and neck for economic restraints and shipping delays. But thank you very much, everyone, for sharing that with us. I think, again, it is a combination of everything. So let's move on a little bit here. We talked about things that have affected the supply chain over the years. Today, where we are, obviously, the pandemic was a big issue. More and more countries are participating, Russ, I would say, in terms of import and export and manufacturing. The rerouting, like we talked about a little bit earlier, in terms of like Vancouver to Montreal, for example.
Yep.
And politics. Politics play a big factor in today, what people are facing. And I think you had shared with me yesterday a little bit about what it's like in the United States, in terms of how different political issues are affecting the supply chain. Yeah,
it's definitely a factor, right? And of course, politics these days is very contentious, right? And emotional and so forth. So that adds to the challenge, because businesses just want to know, what are the rules, what's the guideline, and let me adapt, right? And if things continue to shift constantly, then I'm always having to change my adaptation, and that just makes it harder for us to do business and be profitable. So the less disruption, the better. And the last thing I need is political influence and partisanship and so forth to rear its head in this. There's all kinds of issues there, but the biggest thing is just the volatility and the pace of change, as your slide indicates, right? Things have changed so fast, and you get your head spinning, right? You actually get whiplash just trying to keep track of all the different things. You think you've got a problem solved, supply is starting to get better, transportation starting to get better, and then something else happens, right? And it's just been that environment for the last couple of years. And a big part of it is just because the supply chains have gotten so complex. There's so many different parts and pieces, moving components to it. I think one of the more famous examples that's been cited out there is that the Apple iPhone, right, has like 54 different suppliers and steps in its supply chain to produce the phone. And that's just too complicated, right? How do you manage if there's a disruption in any one of those segments of the chain, right? The ripple effect cascades and makes it a nightmare. So over the course of the last 20 years, the business cycle's been strong, right? Pre-COVID, everybody was making money, moving a lot of product. The economies were good. Cost of money was very low. So things were booming, and we got a little bit spoiled by that. And I think that, now what's happened is we're kind of returning to, the pendulum has swung too far in one direction, right? We were too lean, too complex, too just in time in our orientation, and now we're having to rethink all that stuff because we're in a new reality today. But it's just the pace of all that change over the last few years has been insane.
Yeah, and that just in time thing, like we can't live by that anymore, right?
No.
Like by the skin of our teeth. Oh, we just got that final piece. Okay, quick, let's go.
Right.
Which leads us into, the next part of our chat here, Russ, and that's that, how do you plan to deal with the supply chain, right? So we've spent a lot of time. Sorry, friends in the audience. I know that the first half of this discussion was a little depressing. I apologize.
It can be, yeah.
It can be. So without getting political or emotional about anything, what do we do about these situations? What can our friends in the audience who are in manufacturing, wholesale distribution, and just dealing with the plethora of supply chain factors that come into place? You talked to me about predictive and prescriptive. So I'd like for you to share with our audience how these two aspects of planning can help businesses cope with the supply chain issues, Russ.
Yeah, well, it's really all about data, right? An ERP, a Spire application, does a great job of capturing all kinds of transactional information, right? The ins and outs, the movement of product, the orders, shipments, all that stuff is captured timely and accurately, and that's a great foundation for what we need to do. But the challenge now is, what does all that data tell me in terms of information that I can act on? Right. And one of the challenges with all the volatility in supply chain has been, it's been hard to predict. In an ideal world, we have some predictability about what's going to happen, that I place an order and my vendor has always traditionally had a 4-week lead time. I want to bank on that 4-week lead time and put my plans around production and shipment and all these other things that are impacted by that aligned with that expectation, right? With that predictability. So in a perfect world, things are fairly predictable and consistent, and now I can build strategies and processes and techniques and plans around that. What's happened with all the volatility is we've lost that predictability to a great degree. So now it's ever more important to have that data that we can really see quickly, so we can be agile to adapt to the changes, right? That ideal world doesn't exist anymore. Maybe we'll get back to that, but I don't see it anytime soon. Right. Most experts that I talk to in industry are looking at least a year and a half before we start to get back to some semblance of normal, quote unquote, whatever that is. Some new normal, probably. But at least it would be something consistent that we can manage, right? So in this world of unpredictability, we have to do everything we can to get to force our own internal situation to be more predictable, and that really requires better use of that data. I need to have visibility and agility with that data. I can see around the bend what's going to happen next, and there's a lot of different parts and pieces to that we can talk about, but it starts with data.
Yeah, and agility is about how we react. There's lots of conversations on this topic about being proactive and not solely being responsive, right? And that's kind of in that predictability. We need visibility, we need agility to be able to have somewhat of a crystal ball, if you will, right? And it's fine to say that we need to be reactive and we need to be agile. And it all starts with the data. And where does the data reside? Well, the data resides in the tools, right? And it really does come down to the tools. So I want to talk to you about, where is your ERP enough and where is it not enough, right? So you made mention before about the ERP is transactional. Absolutely. This comes up in every conversation with third-party partners that I have. Source of truth, transactional, where the debits and credits live. There's a lot of operational needs that are met within Spire for your purchase orders, inventory count, price management, all that kind of stuff, your internal business information. And a good ERP should give you at least all of these things, if not more. But for supply chain management in a solution like Spire, I love Spire, but it isn't enough, is it, for true supply chain management? Tell me what we can see in a solution like NetStock that will help people manage the supply chain issues they have.
Yeah, and again, Spire is an awesome product, and it's not alone though in the challenge in this particular challenge, right? Because almost any ERP I can think of, unless you want to spend $1 million for SAP or Oracle, you're going to have this gap, if you will, of being able to translate all that data into actionable information specific to supply chain decision making. Basically, it's
Mhm,
what to buy or make and when to do that, right?
mhm, mhm,
And all that is fed by a couple of different factors. And the ERP just unfortunately doesn't have all the data points that you need to get those answers, right? It
mhm,
doesn't have sophisticated algorithms in it that look at seasonality and other demand patterns and the ability to make easy adjustments to those demand patterns as we learn more. It doesn't
mhm,
have the analytics that says, based on supply and demand for this item and what's going on and what's trending within those forecasts and so forth, here's the right amount of buffer stock or safety stock that I need to have to manage the risks, right? And that's
mhm,
really the purpose of safety stock.
mhm,
Safety stock is a policy driven, intentional amount of inventory that I want to hold to manage risk of either demand going higher than I thought it was, or supply being delayed or reduced more than I thought, right? The lead times extending and so forth. So as
mhm,
I understand those shifts in supply and demand, it results in a proper safety stock calculation.
mhm,
ERPs just don't have the sophistication and the data analytics to figure that out, and certainly not dynamically enough, right? One of
mhm,
the one of the benefits of a purpose-built application like NetStock is that we're recalculating that every single night, right?
mhm,
We're looking at
mhm,
how has demand shifted, how is my supplier performing, uh,
mhm,
what's the current status of my items, and now recalculate every single night what a proper
mhm.
minimum and maximum and current lead time and proper safety stock is for a given item in a given warehouse. And it might be different for different items and maybe different for the same item across different locations, right? Because
Mhm,
there's those different factors play. So that's an example of a data point that just doesn't exist
mhm,
in the ERP. And what we see
mhm,
a lot of folks doing is dumping that data to Excel or maybe to some other BI tool and trying to
mhm,
figure out their own formulas and their own
mhm,
math, which tends to be pretty simplistic. A lot of averaging going on there, and
mhm,
we've all spent time in Excel and know that it's really easy to create a bad formula.
mhm. Yeah,
And right, I think I saw a statistic one where that something like 80% of all business spreadsheets have at least one error in them.
yeah,
And the more complex the spreadsheet, the more potential for error. So you may
yeah,
think you've got even a clean spreadsheet that's helping you, and it's very conceivable that there's bad math going on within that. And if
yeah,
somebody else, God forbid, has to pick up that spreadsheet that somebody built over the course of the last year, it's like picking up somebody else's programming, right? So again, we
right.
talked about labor shortages. If I lose the one individual that understood how that spreadsheet was built and how to manage it and update it, I'm again in a world of hurt, right? So
Yeah.
so there's so there's companies are making buying decisions today, right? They've got data, they've got reports, they're making those decisions today. It's just they're making them with blinders on, right? They're not
Yeah,
getting that full visibility.
yeah,
And so that's our purpose in life, is to create that visibility and the awareness as to what's going
yeah.
on so that I can make changes.
And I think that's a really important thing. Like, our audience doesn't need to know the algorithms. They don't need to know all the
Right.
elements of the data, right? I think we need to know what is the question we're trying to have answered and what are the right tools. Like, be aware, like you're saying, and awareness is what NetStock will bring to the table for the end user. And then NetStock will do the hard math, right? Like, you guys will figure
Yep.
out what these forecasts and demands should look like, right? Our
And,
next,
and it's actually not uncommon when we put a new system in, sometimes the buyer is a little hesitant, right? A little
mhm,
skeptical sometimes.
mhm,
Sometimes the
mhm,
decision was made by a C-level person in the organization, and okay, now I'm the buyer planner and I've been told to use this tool. And so what
yeah,
we find is they'll sometimes keep the spreadsheet running and do their old process at the same time that we're deploying the new application, right? And we'll
yes.
get calls to our support team and so forth. The numbers don't match, right? So NetStock must be wrong.
It's actually the
And
spreadsheet that has a formula in
yeah,
it that's not,
exactly.
yeah,
Because I've been
no,
using this
right.
spreadsheet for 5 years. I know it's right, right?
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah, I've heard
Yes.
that
So then you do
before.
the analysis and dig in and realize, you know what? No, you were making some bad assumptions or you had some bad math, and the more sophisticated look at it that we can provide quickly is actually a more accurate. So sometimes there's that period of onboarding that we go through
Yeah.
with our customers where they have to learn to trust the numbers. And everybody gets there at their own pace, and we work through that process with them. But eventually, once they trust the application, that it's got hundreds of years worth of domain knowledge and experience built into the application, it actually does do a better job than you could do
Yeah.
manually.
Yeah. No need to reinvent the wheel there for sure.
Yeah.
When we talk about some expert advice that you can share, some tips that you can share with our
Hmm.
audience about, about how to deal with these issues and how to be proactive and agile and all the things that we've talked about
Yep.
here.
Yep.
The bottom line is, really have a clear focus on the stressed items and prevent those same mistakes from happening again, right? Let's try and prevent the hurt. And it really boils down to, I think, a very fundamental part here, which is overstock and stock out, right? Like too much, not enough. And what are we going to do about that? So, Russ, one thing I think, and you and I
Hmm.
briefly talked about this the other day, being organized, I mean, that classification, prioritization, organization, clean data as much as possible. We've all heard the
Yep.
expression garbage in, garbage out, right? And if
Yep.
a tool that is very important to manage supply chain issues like net stock is dependent on the data, like we were talking about,
Right.
well, again, that data needs to be in its best form when it's making its way into the ERP, which is the source of truth. And so some of the things that already exist in Spire and I think are basic but helpful reminders that lead us to being well organized and having meaningful reports is the classification and prioritization. So I would like our audience members here today to really think about how well is their data organized in Spire? How well have they put that in? When we talk about creating inventory items, we have the main vendor in which we
Hmm.
would buy that item from. But very nicely in Spire in the vendor prices tab, you can have multiple resources of where you could buy the same or similar product, right?
Yep.
And I think it's important to have that properly organized and have those options there, because something like NetStock will be able to say, you can't buy it from here. Where's the next guy we're going to get it from at the best price? How long is it going to be before it gets here? But the origin of that data needs to exist somewhere, right?
Well, and
So
one of the best practices and one of the things that we're hearing from consultants and practitioners in supply chain the last couple of years, especially, has been to have that alternate vendor
yeah,
environment created, right? Know who those vendors are, and not only that, but buy from them on occasion,
yeah,
right? Yeah, because when push comes to shove and you need to leverage that relationship, it needs to be in place. So you need to understand, how do I place an order?
yeah,
Who do I call? Is there a portal that I place an order on? What are the right forms and processes? Do I have my credit line set up? Well, all those different pieces and parts that if my main supplier fails me and I've got to make a quick decision, I want to be able to make that decision quickly and they know who
yeah,
I am because I've actually bought from them, even if it hasn't been at an optimal price for
right,
whatever reason, right? There's once or twice or three times, whatever the situation is in your case,
right.
use that relationship with that alternate vendor so that it's there when you need it.
Mhm.
And that's a lesson learned over the last few years.
Yeah. And we talk about data integrity, right? Data being
Hmm.
clean, data being accessible, and useless data that's in the system as well, right? So I have a question for you. Which customer does every business have the same? Every business in Canada or the US all have the same customer. Would you know
Yeah,
what that is?
yeah, it's probably called do not use,
Yeah,
right? Or ignore this or something, some name like
that's
that,
right.
right?
That's
And we
right.
we
So
have items and vendors that are named the same kind of thing.
Yeah, you've heard me tell this joke before, clearly.
Yeah.
So yeah, everyone has an inventory item that is to not be sold, a customer that is to not
Right.
be sold to, a vendor in which we should not buy from, and even a GL account in which we should not post to. And it doesn't matter how many asterisks or symbols or whatever you put around this vendor code, someone's still going to use it, right? So when we talk about fundamental, clean data, access to data, something just like the active or inactive option in Spire can go a
Yep.
long way. You know, you're not going to end up having all these vendors that you should be calling when really they're useless. You shouldn't be calling them at all.
Yep.
And then further, Spire has a great ability to categorize. All right, so we talk about classification and prioritization between the fields that exist and the types of users, as you can see on the screen here as an example, or even with the user-defined fields. Spire offers a lot of flexibility in terms of classification, prioritization that
Yep.
then NetStock can go into and pull that information from to really help drive those analytics that we're talking about. So tip one, classification, prioritization, keeping your data organized, right? Hugely important at the entry level here.
Yeah, and what we do in NetStock, a couple key points there. Yes, we do leverage those user-defined fields and custom fields that could be added and so forth to help filter and slice and dice the data when we bring it in for our analytics. So that's absolutely critically important to know that the foundation is there to start with, and then we can leverage that as we do further analytics with it, right? Secondly, we really believe as a best practice is management by exception, right? If I've got 1,000 SKUs or 5,000 SKUs, I can't look at every item every week and figure out what's going on with them, right? So I need a tool that bubbles up those ones that are stressed, as you talked about on the prior slide, right? So which ones, and the way I prioritize even within that is based on classification, which ones are more valuable, which ones provide best margin, which are most important to my most important customers, right? Which ones move the fastest or the slowest. So there's lots of ways to filter that data that now facilitates that management by exception, so I can focus my time and energy on the ones that are going to make the biggest difference, right? These are the ones that are most profitable, most important to my business. So so we can leverage all that.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of that filtering is built right into Spire as well, which is a nice
awesome
feature, really nice feature that exists globally throughout the grids and the modules. So tip number two, improving your demand and forecasting reports, right? Now, this is a bit easier said than done. So Russ, I think your first point was about communications, internal communications. You want to talk to me about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think, again, one of the things that we've learned, especially in the stressful last couple of years, is that the quality and the quantity of communication, both up and downstream in your supply chain, has to increase. And the firms that have fared the best in the stressful situations that we've been in are those that have good working relationships with their suppliers. So externally, talking to those suppliers, and sometimes if I have the opportunity, suppliers, right, get one step further down the chain to see what's going on in the marketplace, what's going on in the production environment, lockdowns, whatever it might be going on during COVID. You have to have that open channel of communication. And then likewise with your customers, what are you seeing in the marketplace? What do you anticipate? What are you hearing from your customers, your competition, so that you can make your adjustments internally and adjust those demand forecasts. A forecast is an estimate, right? It's never 100% correct. And we can have all the algorithms in the world that do very sophisticated math, but there still has to be that tribal knowledge and input from the people on the street. And we may talk about this a little bit later, but there's some big firms recently, Target and Revlon have been in the news, for example, with having way too much inventory because they overbought, they misjudged. And these are companies with huge amounts of data and data scientists and analytics that they have available to them. So you might ask, well, then what hope is there for my middle market customer, right? For my Spire user? Well, the fact is, if we have good data, we're actually closer to the action and have the ability to have those quick communications and make quick decisions. I don't have to go through a committee of 10 or 50 people at some corporate headquarters in an ivory tower somewhere. I'm making the decision right now, and I can move and be agile, right? I'm not that oil tanker in the water. I can be a jet ski out there and say, okay, that just changed, bang, I'm going this way. So with proper communications externally, you have that ability. And then the internal thing is, we talk here about sales and operations planning. Sometimes it's referred to as sales inventory and operations planning, SIOP. But whatever the term is, what it means is collaboration, internal communication between operations folks that are either buying or doing the producing, if I'm a manufacturer, finance folks that have an impact on what's my level of inventory investment that I want to accept, and that's, that I'm willing to invest in, and then the supply chain folks that say, okay, here's the reality on the ground in terms of my supply chain. One of the great things that's happened as a result of all the turbulence in supply chain lately is in the middle market now, especially those folks that are the buyers and planners, and they may have multiple hats in the company, right, depending on the size of the firm, now have what the phrase I've heard is seat at the table. Historically, that has not been the case in middle market. It's always been that way for bigger enterprises. They have this process in place of S&OP. It's maybe a little less formal in a smaller firm, but now there's a much greater appreciation, especially from the executives and owners of these middle market firms, for how challenging and how important this buying, planning, supply chain role is in the company, right? There's a greater appreciation than ever. So now there's a real opportunity for all those different constituents in the organization to once a week, whatever, get together and have that agreed to one set of data that says, yes, this is really what's happening. So based on that, what is our policy? What's our decision? What do we want to accomplish, right? So that's a huge step forward in an internal operation.
And the tools to get there, right? The tools to be able to have that fluid internal communication or that consistent communication with your external relationships, your vendors, your customers. I'm a bit old school. I love picking up the phone and calling a customer or a vendor.
Sure.
I think that goes a long way, and I think it's hard for businesses to just remain consistent in that practice. And also internally, right? So it's not just that once a month meeting or biweekly meeting, the tools that come in and the techniques that are adopted with that. If there is a fully integrated ERP or third-party solution like NetStock that feeds right in, then all those different departments have visibility into the organization and the flow in which things are happening. And while 100%. While so many of us have been working from home for the last couple of years, we can still have visibility. We can still be on the same playing field as a unified team, right? And that does remove that dependency on external tools like spreadsheets and, data that is static. It's not live information. It's just kind of been sitting there and then go back and then repopulate and blah, 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 right? While the salesperson is waiting for the answer from finance to be able to actually push the order through, right? So all of these things, I love that Spire is real time. I love that NetStock also is real time in terms of being able to grab that data and actually make use of it. I think a term that we overly use in the industry is drive meaningful corporate data from your reports. Okay, sure, and it's true. We do need meaningful corporate information that comes from this data, but talking about it with your team, having that conversation with your external resources, I think is important because the supply chain issue affects every single person along the way. Right.
Yeah, well, again, data for a data's sake, it doesn't solve the problem, right? The purpose of the data is to help me make better decisions. And so to be able to do that, I have to share the data and have it in a platform that's easily shared, right? So a dashboard type of approach, for example, where everybody, again, has that common understanding. Yep, this is the reality. Now, what are we going to do about it, right? Instead of, well, my spreadsheet shows this and my spreadsheet shows that, that doesn't work.
Yeah. And we talked about this, so in sales and operations planning, or sometimes sales inventory operations planning, those data policies throughout the company. Policies are hard to implement. They're hard to maintain. So when we talk about the company, the organization, or our audience members for that matter, all having access to the same thing and the same policies and practice, what have you seen work really well to maintain that throughout the company?
Well, it starts on top, and I think even beyond that, it starts with how do you go to market, right? One of our existing Spire customers is Prairie Battery. You may be familiar with them, right? And I
Mhm.
had a conversation with them not too long ago, and if you and this is true of many businesses, right? They go to market in a certain way. They, right? And you'll see it on their website. You'll see it in any advertising or marketing that they're doing. Hey, we stock. Huge number of inventory. We'll have the part you need. We'll ship within 24 hours. All that kind of stuff, right? So that now sets a tone for how I go to market. That's my personality of my business, if you will. So now I have to have policies that support that. If I'm
Yeah.
making a commitment to my customer that I can ship any order within 24 hours, that's a big commitment. And it's
Yeah.
expensive to be able to meet that goal, right? Because I have to have a huge inventory investment to do that. So somewhere in there is the right balance for every individual business. It may be different, but you have to come to that conclusion. And that usually that's driven top down, right? So
Right.
the owner or the C-level of the organization says, this is who we are, this is what we're willing to commit to, this is how we go to market, et cetera. But then
Mhm.
that has to be communicated throughout the organization. Okay, if that's our
Mhm.
policy, then what actions do we take to support that policy? And that's got to be
Mhm.
consistent throughout the
Mhm.
organization. Again,
Mhm.
easier said than done. It's that
Mhm.
communication piece. But
Mhm.
again, it's also reliant on that common set of data and understanding of who we are as a business.
Mhm. It's almost like software is easier to change than people, right?
Oh,
So,
for sure. For sure. No doubt.
yeah, and our friends in the audience know that changing their software isn't always easy too. So, I think that, again, those team conversations, making sure that from the top down, everyone kind of has that visibility, that access, and the ability to offer their input. Because
Absolutely.
their roles are important throughout the organization, and happy employees, all that stuff that we talked about earlier when we were talking about labor shortages. This all goes into the planning aspect. It all goes into the ability at the end of the day to have that predictive analytics that we're working towards. These are all, I guess, what I would refer to as recipe ingredients, Russell, if
Yeah.
you will, to help get us to that ultimate point of being able to produce forecast and demand to help deal with the supply chain issues that are going on. Um, can you talk to me a little bit about how NetStock with Spire is able to offer that BI, that predictive analysis? We know Spire is the source of truth and NetStock is going and reaching in, but tell me a little bit more, like how Prairie Battery, for example, might be using their NetStock with Spire.
Yeah, so I think the big issue from the predictability standpoint is we take all that analysis, and again, if we're doing management by exception, we're identifying which items are stressed, right? So it's not just where am I currently stocked out, for example, right? I know that, and ERP can actually give me that report, right? Here's where I'm out of stock. But what about where am I about to be out of stock? Can I predict that based on
Mm-hmm.
current supply and demand profiles for this item in this location, that I'm at risk of running out in the next week or 2 weeks or whatever before maybe the next replenishment arrives, right? Based on, again,
Mm-hmm.
all those lead times and understanding those factors. So now I get ahead of the curve a little bit. Or the other side of the coin is if I have too much of a piece of inventory, right? I can already see that I've got, $1 million more or $500,000 more inventory than I need to, and it's broken down across these inventory items. Well, I can see that static figure today, but what does the future look like? Can I predict that based on purchase orders that are already issued, that are on their way in, that when they arrive, if they come in too soon before I need them, I'm going to make that excess stock problem worse. So
Yeah.
perhaps I can delay that order or combine it with a later one or take some action. So it's the predictability of of what's happening, what's coming, based on all the analysis that makes a huge difference because now I can take action. And
Be
then those actions
proactive.
and then
Yeah.
those actions are what we would call prescriptive data
Right.
analytics, right? So there's
Right.
predictive and prescriptives. Now, on prescriptive standpoint, I can say, yeah, cancel that order or airship some of this stuff because I got to get it in before I run out of all of it. I don't need all of it, but I need this much quantity to be
Right.
airshipped, and I'm willing to pay extra freight for that to get it here because I can't lose that sale or make
Right.
that customer mad. So
Yeah.
now I have what actions I can take to prevent those problems from occurring that I've predicted were going to happen if I took no action.
Hmm.
It's huge.
Very powerful
It's a
tool.
game
Yeah.
changer.
Yeah, it is a game changer for sure. Um, when we talk about forecast and demand, I think before we start, for those, well, I have a question for those in the
Mhm.
audience, actually. I would like to know from our friends in the audience if they actually used forecast and demand reporting in their business. Don't worry about how you're doing it. The question is, do you currently use forecast and demand? And your answers are, yes, we rely on it heavily. So you are using something, you're very happy with it. It's a big part of how you operate your business. Or yes, we do, but we don't do it very well, right? So we have some kind of a concept of like what we need to do. And then, the rest kind of just, we fill in the blanks, right? No, but we really should be. And thank you, Russ and Katie, for talking about this. Or no, and I don't see a need for it at all. It's
Yeah.
really not something I do, because there are some people who just roll with customer demand just like that, and that's how they respond.
Yep.
Right? There's
Yep.
no, and if that's the model of your business, then hey, that's fine.
Some businesses that works, you bet.
Yeah, what works for you, right? So only 31% have voted. For those of you who are looking at a different monitor, you want to take a second here and maybe answer the question for me. Do you use forecast and demand? Rely on it heavily? Yes, but we don't do it very well. No, but we really should be. And no, it's just not my jam, not my thing. I'm going to go ahead and, oh, thank you. That number jumped up once I asked people. It's amazing when you ask what you get. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll for now, and I'm going to go ahead and share the answers. And Russ, you should be able to see this also.
Yes.
So very small percentage is relying heavily on forecast and demand. So that's great. But the larger stat in this poll is, yes, we don't do it very well.
And that's what I would have predicted, right? Because everybody understands for the most part that, yeah, I've got to have some sort of sense of what the future looks like, but I don't have the right tools to do it. So we probably don't do it very well. We're trying, we're working at it, but I could get better, right?
Right. And so thank you everybody for taking the time to do that. I think, Russ, if we're going to start doing forecast and demand, or we're doing it and maybe not doing it so well, this, the concept of maturity curve and evaluating where you are on this maturity curve is probably one of the best ways to get going on this concept, right?
Yeah, I think it's a good way to think. Yeah, I think it's a good way to think about it. It's a good framework to sort of put this in perspective for you. And I sometimes have done presentations at conferences and webinars on just on this topic, on the idea of a maturity curve. So it's really the concept is that I'm doing something and it's at some level of sophistication, right? I'm making decisions today on how much to buy or how much to make, based on some sort of inputs and feedback from different places, right? So it depends on where you are in that maturity curve as to how sophisticated you are, what tools you're using, and so forth. So, at the most simple level, it's probably just relying strictly on ERP reports, right? And maybe standard reports, maybe customized reports. Maybe you've gone to your Spire partner and asked for some configuration of a custom report using some of the data that's there. So that might be kind of an entry level, if you will. And again, maybe that's working for you. Only you can assess that, right? And you'll know based on the symptoms. The symptoms of the problem are I'm running out of stuff, or I've got way too much of other stuff, right? So if you have those problems, then what you're doing isn't working as well as it needs to, right? So now the next step is, okay, what's next on my maturity curve? What is the next step that I could take? And how do I get there from here? And I think it becomes a process of continuous improvement. What I see in most successful firms that are trying to tackle this problem is they'll take that first step, and it might be then the next step might be to dump data out of ERP instead of just running custom reports, dump it out of the ERP into a dashboarding PI tool or into Excel, do some pivot tables and get some relatively sophisticated analysis there, right? So that's the next step up in sophistication or in maturity, if you will. But then as that falls short, if I still have the symptoms of the problems that we talked about, then maybe I need to get more sophisticated with that and use a third-party application that's purpose-built, a NetStock type tool, right, to really do the further analytics. But then maybe the next step in that maturity curve is not just that, but do a better job of monitoring how
Yeah.
I'm performing, right? So
Yeah.
how well are my forecasts performing? I said this was what I expected. How close was I? What was that variance? What's that amount of risk? Again, right? We talked about risk being the key factor in supply chain
Yeah.
management. It's mitigating risk. So there's levels that you can move all along that curve. And I think every time you take a step, my advice to customers is to say, okay, I'm going to settle in on that for a while. Let's do this for
Yeah.
3 months, 6 months, let things settle in, because this is just one piece of the puzzle, right? And if I make
Yeah.
a change here, I have to let it reverberate and roll
Yeah.
out through the rest of the organization, then decide, okay, I'm ready for the next step.
And be very thoughtful about each phase,
Absolutely.
about each step, right? And what are some missing elements that could complete this maturity level that you're at, allowing you
Yep.
to then perhaps consider or evaluate if you need to move on to something even more sophisticated. With all the years that this has been going on and businesses have been dealing with this and
Mhm.
and growing towards different maturity levels of being able to analyze and report, most businesses are at number 3, where they're just kind of at demand planning. And
Yeah.
this might fit that segment of our audience who said yes, but not very well. Yes, we do it, but not very well, right? And so you're not alone out there,
No,
guys.
no.
Like a lot of businesses are kind of in limbo if they are adopting forecast and demand and not really sure how to make it more sophisticated or what to do with the findings that they have, right? And so
Yep.
using an ERP, data dump from one ERP to another tool, and then a purpose-built application like NetStock. Those are 3 main categories, if you will,
Yes.
of the maturity curve, right?
Yep. Yep.
And then for those of you who are in that limbo stage, Russ, you would agree that in order to move forward to the next level of sophistication on the maturity curve, really evaluating where you are, where do you want to be, and how do you get there, right?
Yep.
Like, what else can NetStock do to help you reach ultimate sophistication in providing forecast and demand, which therefore will save you headaches and money and all that
Yeah,
stuff,
I think
right?
that honest self-evaluation is where it starts, right?
Yeah,
Be brutally honest with yourself and with
yeah,
your teammates in your company as to where are we, right? Okay, we've been
yeah,
using the spreadsheet for a while. Is it really everything we think it should be or hope it needs to be? Does it solve the problem? So you really got to
yeah.
be honest with yourself.
Yep, absolutely. One of the hardest things to do sometimes. And so
Yep.
continuous improvement, I think, even if you are like, for those of you who rely heavily on forecast and demand and you're doing it very well and you're managing the supply chain issues, you're very happy with the health and integrity of the situation. Everything is always a work in progress, right? Whether it's business
Well,
goals that we're trying to achieve or personally. So
yeah, and
constant,
because the dynamics are so great, right? Things are changing all the time, so you're
right,
never going to stand pat. There's always going to be some other
right.
external influence that needs you to move forward on your improvement.
Right. And whether that's, you're evaluating what other types of reporting can we retrieve from our existing
Yep.
ERP, whether they are custom reports that your Spire consultant has built for you, or clever ways of using the filtering that exists in all the grids and all the modules in Spire as well. So reporting is huge. We depend on it. So constantly exploring what else is available. Let's move away from spreadsheets as much as possible, Russ. I think we're all in agreement with
Yeah,
that.
it's a great tool for right purposes, right? You can do some amazing
Yeah,
things with a spreadsheet, but not supply chain.
no. And, Excel still is the most popular accounting software in the world, even though it's not an accounting software, as we
Yes.
all know. Adopt dashboard reports. I think
Yep.
traditionally people are used to looking at those, old school crystal printed kind of reports, or a PDF version of that. And okay, this report for this and this report for this, and then maybe someone magically threw them together and now you only have one piece of paper to look at. But the dashboard concept is just, it's that information at a glance at your fingertips that allows you to be predictive and agile, right?
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
opposed to sifting through all of
Yep.
that
And they can
data.
be graphical and colorful and really, show you what you need to see at a glance.
Yeah, and that's important to just kind of outline a little bit more. The human eye is attracted to color. That's
Yep.
why when we do tables in Excel, we highlight every second row so that we're not looking at that like green bar kind of,
Yep.
old school thing. Um, and we're not all financial and analyzing professionals, right? Like a lot of our audience members are business owners that are redistributing or manufacturing a product. They're good at what they do. And
Yep.
sifting through data sometimes is just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and just the time constraints of our daily life, right? We got to get something quick.
Yeah. Yeah. And the dashboard really does that. And we had some screenshots earlier of some of those nice NetStock dashboard reports. So the algorithms, like, understand the formulas that help you analyze your current situation. This does not mean know how to write the formula, but like I said earlier, know which question to ask, right? And when you know which question to ask, then you have an expert either at NetStock or a Spire consultant that can help bring that formula to reality to help get that information that you want. But just understand what it is that you're asking for, I think is huge. And then consider other data and different ways of looking at that data, right? You know, when we talk about driving meaningful insight, which is a very cliche thing to say still, it does mean looking at other pieces of data or positioning that data in a way that does mean something to you. So that predictive analytics that we were talking about.
Yeah, and again, with that S&OP process, the data is the starting point of the conversation, right? So there still has to be that communication and agreement and go forward policy process and so forth. So yeah, that's still part of it.
Yep. So a lot of what we talked about here today is good practice, organization, categorization, prioritization, understanding where you are, honest self-evaluation, where can you improve? Does predictive analytics play a huge part in how successful your business is and how the day-to-day flow of your business is and the future of your business? NetStock has been a Spire partner for some time now, and we have Spire clients that are very happy using your product as well. Russ, you are an expert on this topic, and thank you for sharing your advice with our audience members here today. I hope that there's a few good little gems that you guys picked up that you can start applying, maybe evaluate where you are on the maturity curve, and reach out to your Spire partner, because they know Russ and they'll be able to get together with Russ and really explore if this is a direction your business wants to take. So Russ, thanks again for joining me here today. I really appreciate you sharing your time with us. And ladies and gentlemen, I definitely encourage you to, again, visit the Spire events webpage. You'll be able to see all of the events that we have coming up. Our next knowledge-based webinar series is August 17th at noon Eastern time. We're going to be joined by Keith Webster, my friends from TerraCore. We're going to be talking about customer portals in an e-commerce world. So again, we're just 1 minute past the hour. So I thank again everyone for joining us. Russ, again, thanks for your time and your expertise. And
my pleasure.
I hope you have a good rest of the day, and we'll see everyone next month. Thanks so much.
Thanks, you too. Look forward to talking to you guys further. Take care.
Thanks, Russ. Bye-bye.
Yep, bye-bye.